record.
Yeah.
Always press record.
Always press record, yeah. So here we go. Okay, let's do it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next episode of the Cathode Ray podcast. I'm joined by my friend Steve Nutter, and also we have Justin from Console Kits here. How you doing, mate? Good to see you.
I'm doing good. How's Steve doing? Like, are you still tired from Retro World?
Oh yeah, definitely. That was a taxing trip, but I was laughing. I checked in with Lewis and I was like, look, I don't think we should start off with Justin. He said he kind of would be able to come on early, and then I text you and I was like, wait a second, and then you text me and you're like, I haven't even made it home yet, and
Yeah,
you had a flight delay or something. What happened?
Yeah, what happened there?
Just my flight was completely delayed. I was flying through Chicago, and they canceled it because of weather. And then there was no recourse. I had to pay for it all out of my pocket, like hotel, everything. And they're like, sorry,
yourself.
like we don't
Yeah.
do, we don't comp hotels anymore if it's from weather. It's like everything. It was horrible. But anyway, I made it home in one piece. That's the
Made it
important part.
home. Dang, that is rough. Okay, so did you have to stay overnight in somewhere, like some other city?
Yeah. Well, I was in Connecticut still. I was stuck in Connecticut, so I stayed there at the airport, spent the night.
Exciting.
Wake up real early in the morning, and we're talking Uber, hotel at higher prices than normal because I'm near the airport. I'm like, whatever. But I made it home. We had a lot of fun there, and I learned a lot of things. And something about me that you probably don't know, Lewis, is like I've been a big contributor to the RetroRGB scene for a very long time, but I'm kind of behind the scenes. So the website design, all of that, getting it to be more of a blog. That's some of my biggest contributions. And I own many CRTs, so it's not like you see behind me like, oh, you got all these LCD panels, get away from you, you center. It's like I have over 12 tubes in my home, and I'm hoping this podcast you guys can teach me, because they're gonna need repaired, they're gonna need fixing up, and I'm gonna try to make Steve my new best friend, because I learned two things. He wants to sell me a PVN BVM with a promise of 10,000 hours of live, so hopefully he'll come good on that.
Forever the salesman, this guy. Forever the salesman.
Right. It must have been after that bottle of wine at dinner.
Yeah.
But then I learned at Retro World that there's things called prison TVs. These are televisions that were actually in prisons, right? And I'm like, can Steve get me one of those?
Yeah.
Whoa, man! It's funny you should say that. I'm on these. About the only remnants of me hanging on to any of my Facebook profile is me watching marketplaces and then CRT groups that share listings. And some guy, and it was unfortunately in Kansas or something. He's like, I've got this prison TV, and like I can get more of them, but I just want to get rid of them. Is anybody interested in them? And everybody was like, no. And I was like, if you're near Virginia, I'll pay $100 each for them. And he was like, that was when he told me he was in Kansas, and I was like, they're not worth trying to arrange a freight shipment yet of them. Maybe, I don't know, maybe, but
Right, the market's still a little small, even though they're ultra cool. I mean, I'd like to just get a prison TV and then store something inside of it, just because that was why I was like, can't store your drugs. I'm going to put my weed in the prison TV just because that seems like the right thing to do.
Tape it on the inside and like even write on there your stuff in there, and you totally
Definitely not weed. Yeah.
There's totally a reason those were clear, right?
Start calling my girlfriend the superintendent or something. Yeah.
Yeah, those are harder to get than the PVMs, it seems like sometimes. But yeah, so Justin, that's where we had first met at, and that's what you had done. The majority of our contribution was behind the scenes with Bob.
Right.
And we met right before kind of the pandemic happened.
Where did you guys meet originally?
Well, it was similar to what we were at this time, where it was just a meetup of us, and I want to say it probably was half the size it was this year for people that came, but a lot of the same people, Bob and My Life in Gaming, and a lot of people that were there this last time were again here.
But there was definitely, if you remember last time, Rourke was there, and he was kind of the life of the party. We missed him this time.
Yeah, because he had that terrible car accident that he's still, I'm sure, recovering from, and then I knew he just moved. So I was hoping, that's kind of one of the things I was hoping to see if he would be able to make it, but I was really going to be surprised if he could. But
so
yeah,
this
we
one
met
was
Rourke.
much smaller. I didn't understand. Sorry, this event was much smaller than the previous one, or the other way around?
The previous event wasn't really tied to an expo. So
okay. It was
that
just
was
guys
the
hanging out.
reasoning this one was changed up, was because it was part of the Retro World Expo, which I think was hoping that more people would come, and then it's exactly what happened, because you would have opportunities for some people to come and like try to sell things, vendors if they wanted to.
Right. So we get a different set of people. So Scarlet Sprites, for example, was able to make it to this one at Retro World, so we got to meet up with him. It was the first time I ever met Joe, and that was really cool.
Me too.
Shank, like I missed Bob's interview with Shank. I'd seen him on YouTube. Shank did this video on Virtual Boy. I think that was a pretty hot one. But then meeting in person, I mean, I came there because in the community of Arcade 1-Up, there's this new device that someone wants to make. Basically, these cabinets don't have HDMI out, and the newer cabinets have online fighting. You want to play Mortal Kombat online. You want to play Street Fighter online. There's a community of people that want to do just like tournaments, right? Well, how are you going to capture it? And they want to do it. There's this community of people. All these people have the cabs, and they're fighting against each other. And then they want to stream it on YouTube and kind of create this tournament. And so I came there with this whole like, hey, so here's the thing. The PCBs on these things do LVDS. And I start talking that to Shank, and he's like, do you know the difference between LVDS and HDMI? I will get down to the, like he's talking about every circuit.
What is LVDS? I've never heard of that acronym before.
So it's like HDMI. That's what I learned from Shank. It's basically a very similar protocol. And basically it's what an LCD panel takes. Like if you were to remove the scaler from a television, the wire that goes to the panel is LVDS.
Okay.
And so it's after the scaling. It's just that raw video. And so Shank was saying, you basically, create a converter with resistors is what he's explaining, because like an LVDS is just higher voltage than HDMI, but a similar spec. Anyway, we had a great conversation with that. What I learned is like Shank's like the new blood of the RGB scene, like he has all these grandiose ideas. Like even in the RGB panel, he kind of ended it with this beautiful, like, I think he said it the best way. He's like, the future is bright in both LCDs and CRTs. And it's not a competition, right? It's like, in the world of CRTs, there's projects like the Open CRT project, which you guys, if you know anything about it, please tell me more, because I'm doing research on it. I can't find anything about this, right?
Did we talk to this guy, Thomas Dady, you were talking about here?
Yeah, he was
Is
one
this
of
the
our
one?
first guests on on our podcast. Goodness,
Hmm.
that's about 9 months ago, probably.
I'll have to look at that one.
Right about the same time Bob had him on, and that was about it. And then
He made that release, that
that's-
announcement back then, sort of. So it's sort of, as much as I've understood as well, so it's connecting directly onto the neck board, just using the tube and a few of the other components and being able to replace the rest, which means if you've got a tube, it's developing the circuitry to fire the guns.
Right.
And running that, and that's not as easy as I'm making it to sound.
It's replacing a lot of the stuff. Kind of, I would imagine, like it's doing in the arcade boards with the new FPGAs and Misters projects and things. I think that's what it's designed around, is an FPGA. I think, I'm not positive, but I haven't. I don't think it's one of those things that definitely was so new that I know it was going to be something that's going to be taking some time. But it does give you hope for things that. Normally tubes, to be able, if you could have a tube to be able to do something like that crazy just by adding it, people would pay really any price if you could just get a big tube to all of a sudden do everything that a BVM or a PVM that's got multi-format ability, if you could figure that out. And that's what he's ultimately trying to do. There's going to be people that would pay for it. And then
it'll take a while. He's working on it. It's not something that's going to come quickly. It's not something that has, I think, sexy updates all the time. And Thomas doesn't sort of sound like the clickbaity kind of guy either. He's just a salt of the earth dude working hard on something he cares about. So maybe we should check in with Thomas and just see what he's up to.
But this is such high level stuff. And the reason that I could tell from he's on like the engineering side of power like high power, high voltage in that industry. So like that he knows about these high voltage things. But the thing is since, and you can even see this in if you ever do anything with like PCs, how over the time period there's still over the last 30 years, like the format of a tower PC hasn't really changed that much. But of course its abilities have, and that's really because modern parts are not only more capable, but they get smaller, they're less hot. So if you think about that, if we kept going with the same kind of technology on CRT as far as even just the board components, that could bring forth so much more abilities to do with the tube. And I think that's what maybe the best part about all this is that eventually that's what it'll lead to.
I'll give you the clickbaity version of it.
Sure.
Imagine 1440p coming out of your Mister, going directly into this brand new neckboard, and it's literally drawing 1440 lines of resolution in 4:3 with a consumer grade monitor. Like HD
no lag.
CRTs, like that's insane idea that's possible. So I thought that was interesting. Shank, I missed. It was a black spot for me. I didn't catch up anything that Thomas was doing. So for him to kind of revive that and remind everyone that like the future is bright with that. But then also LCD. I think the summary of the panel that I thought was really interesting. And I watched a previous podcast last week, so I think this is something that was not talked about. It was there's 3 key pieces to get an LCD to be. I don't want to use on par with the CRT, but this idea
producing a similar image. Okay,
right, exactly. So if you got a challenge of motion blur, right?
Okay,
you got a challenge of simulating that scan line and then lag. And do you remember, Steve? They were mentioning that one person has actually reached out to some manufacturer and like shook them and said there is a problem with lag. God damn it, there's a problem with lag.
No, that was like yeah, go ahead, because I actually had to miss that panel and watch the booth.
Missed the panel.
Yeah, I told that was the one that I went down there and manned the booth during that one panel. So I didn't actually get to see that yet. I have to go back and watch it.
Yeah, so I missed who it was. And
I want to break that down for a moment. Yeah. Actually, that's interesting, the three pillars. So I guess we could start on lag. How, like, I'm using this, I've got a 20-inch 4:3, it's 5-6 milliseconds, I think even less of response time. What's happening with modern monitors there? Why is lag an issue under a frame, or where are they at right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know, like, the newer OLEDs have, like, an NVIDIA, some type of hyper-accelerated anti-lag mode, or I don't know, it has some buzzword to it, I can't remember what it's called, where I think it's under a millisecond. But I don't know if that's obtainable for a lot of people, though. Maybe as OLED becomes, I don't know if that's like exclusive to OLED, but like the monitors that I have behind me, the Arcade 1-Ups are about, it's weird, it's not a variable lag, but the top of it is about 8 milliseconds of lag, and the bottom of it is 17 milliseconds of lag. So you could probably just average it out to a single frame. Now, of course, when you're talking about Arcade 1-Up, it's like you got to check all that stuff at the door of like high quality. Like, obviously, if you want to play some arcade games, original board or Mister would be your first option on a CRT. But if you're saying, hey, I'm going to go to Walmart, and I know in Estonia they're probably not as readily available, but these Arcade 1-Ups, they've sold 3 million of them, right? So
whoa,
it's insane. Like a really clickbaity way to say it is Arcade 1-Up has sold more Pac-Mans than Namco ever made. Or Midway ever produced.
Is that 3 million figure? Is that like all of them kind of over the up till last year or something, or the last reported numbers?
Yeah, that's since they started in 2018.
Wow, I had no idea there was so many of them. So, I mean, you know the community much better than us, Justin, and you're very much, your channel's focused around this. Mm-hmm. So this community is bigger than I imagined. I don't know, for Steve, we both never imagined there were so many people into this.
I've been following Console Kit's Justin's channel since like we actually met the first time, because we were talking about this, about how he had just started kind of talking about it, and the first big video was about the Star Wars 1-Up, right? Machine, kind of, wasn't that the big? And So I remember at this time it was Arcade 1-Up was so new, and a lot of the things were like, well, is it really going to like stay around, right? Is it, or is it? Are they going to actually be able to make money? Because it seemed to me like such a challenge. Because basically leading up to this point, and we can go through this, Justin, up to this point before they even came to the market, a lot of this stuff that was always sent out and mass-produced that wasn't made by one of the main companies felt like most of the time was garbage. Like a lot of those flashback consoles and then a lot of those kind of scammy things you'd see almost sold right next to the Arcade 1-Ups in Walmart that are like the joystick things that would have 2 ROMs on it or something and weren't properly licensed. I remember there was a big scandal about that. So I was really impressed personally how the whole like they've developed into a much more reputable and like focused on certain things that are great. Like you said, the futuristic things that we were talking about.
Right. So we'll take a tangent on Arcade 1-Up for a moment, but let's come back to the 3 pillars. I think that's definitely a discussion we can tie back in. So when I first started following Arcade 1-Up, their first generation were very much like the corner drugstore little joystick that you would buy. It was cheaply made. It was very crappy, and unfortunately, people like My Life in Gaming reviewed those first generation models and said this is crap. Right? RetroRGB and Ray Commend, Bob, they both saw that first Street Fighter and like this is crap. And I started working closely with Arcade 1-Up to give that feedback. I was like, so I took a look at your circuit board, and you have a scaler in between the SoC and the panel, right? And so I worked with another person. We figured out, like, the SoC is putting out 640 by 480, and then they're upscaling it to 1280 by 1024, which is changing the aspect ratio as well. And there's all this analog noise in the signal. It's the power on the LCD is really hot, and so the bulbs are really bright. There's just all of these things that are bad. And we kind of just sent that information to them, and we don't know what happened. Then when the Star Wars cabinet came out, all of it changed. So the chipset outputs 960p directly from the SoC. There's no scaler. It's just native out 960p. And they got an IPS monitor now. They started improving their buttons and their sticks. It's not perfect by any means. All the buttons and the sticks could be replaced with better arcade parts. But they did really, in my opinion, move away from that, crappy device that you would get. They're using third-party companies to do the emulation, right? And the latest Blitz cabinet, as an example, they got the original software developers that worked on the Blitz source code, and they reported it to Android. There's no emulator in there. They recompiled it for Android. Now, they had to do that because of the license with the NFL. They had to remove late hits and all these things about the game. So they had to do, and you couldn't do it with a ROM hack, right? So they actually did recompile the game. So the company has really moved along and the community has really grown. And I've been trying to push technology. So I guess
after 3 million sales overall, this company has enough traction to get going. They've had enough to get to the next stage and the next stage and then build a better device each time and not sort of alienate there was enough to get going, right? And now it's getting there.
That's right. And even last year they switched, they started making these larger cabinets. They call them XL cabinets, and they're not a 1x1, but they're definitely a lot bigger. They're very big cabinets. I have the Golden Tee. It feels like I have a real Golden Tee, and my wife is like, this is not a toy anymore. This is a gigantic piece of furniture in our room, so gotta find a better spot for it. But they screwed up. They got a TN monitor on there. It's a really crappy monitor, like it's washed out. And me and a couple other influencers just made videos on it. Like, this is the worst monitor that Arcade 1-Up has ever made, ever used. This is going backwards. And they put all of their product line on pause until they could reacquire the better monitor. And that's what they're doing going forth, is only using IPS monitors. So the technology, there's a group of us that are really leaning into the technology and calling them out when they're doing something wrong and they misstep, and they're making corrections. So that's good.
Do you have an actual communication with the company? Because from your description, it sounded quite one way, but is there a dialogue happening there?
It's interesting. A group of us do have like a group chat with employees of the company, and it is still kind of one way. in the sense of we give feedback, but there's not a lot of information our way. It's very much like an influencer relationship in the sense of they're like, okay, next week we're going to do an announcement. They won't even tell us what the announcement's going to be, but they're just like, get ready to make content if you're interested.
Interesting. Are they American-based company?
Yeah. Yeah, they're based in Florida now.
Oh, right on. Okay.
So this is all though a great story for how people in this community in like retro can actually provide feedback, and then surprisingly a company would be willing to take that feedback and make changes, and serious changes at that. I'm sure it wasn't cheap to think about it, but at the same time they knew that if they had that bad press on the product and they just kept selling it, it would always be kind of like, because they're going to be around, they've got these licenses, they've got plans,
right.
Money's there, it's going to happen. It would just be like the black eye. It becomes like, oh yeah, but then there was that one, bad thing, and they didn't really do right when they could have. And sometimes it's better to just get that done like in the beginning, as opposed to waiting till it becomes an even worse issue down the road and it affects your reputation long term.
Right. I'll give you a quick example of them doing some pretty cool things. So there's this company called Digital Eclipse, Other Ocean. These are companies that are out of British Columbia. And Digital Eclipse, they were responsible for doing the port for a lot of the Williams arcade cabinets back in the 90s. They ported those games like, I don't know, Sinistar, Asteroids, or not Asteroids, that's, what am I thinking? Defender, right? So that those William collections. They ported it to the Sega Genesis in the 90s, right? So, and maybe you remember it again. It came out again with like the PlayStation. You could play these. So that company that knows the hardware of Williams really well for decades is the same company that they used to bring those same games to the arcade 1-up. And so they took that same emulator that they've evolved over the time, which is now ported to Android. And so they're using a commercial emulator. So it's not just MAME, it's not just open source, that they're not stealing licenses, and it's not just some commercial emulator. It's like the best in the industry that you're an expert in the industry. And so those companies, that developer, he's getting paid. He's getting paid by that $3 million that's really being sold. There's royalties involved, so I think that's cool.
That is really, really good. Because sometimes I will go around like my town here, and I'll walk into some kind of restaurant, half/bar kind of thing, and they'll have again a machine over in the corner, and it's this junk filled with MAME that somebody has thrown. I went up to it one time. It had 5,000 ROMs on it, and somehow you pay money to play. And I was just laughing, thinking, how could anybody ever come in here and even find the game they want to play? Because then you go to you find the game you want, and then it's like 28 knockoff versions of it. You don't know which one's the right one. And then I never see anybody playing them. But for some reason, somebody's able to sell them and sell people on having them. And maybe they do eventually go in there and their kids are so bored they let them go play on it. But I think that with the way that, like you say, Arcade 1-Up then goes and gets emulators, but that in turn, the reason, or when they do that, that incentivizes developers to put resources into that field. And then everybody, like you said, in the end gets better, where now you're getting guys that worked on these original games, like the Blitz game, coming back and redesigning this whole thing, so that that's a pretty good opportunity, or a chance for them at the same time to make sure that they're involved directly with it. It's like Spielberg coming out to do another one of his old movies, as opposed to letting somebody else just do it. He's like, well, I'll take it by the reins. And
but having said that, is that
someone's
knowledge,
going to care about it more?
Is that knowledge still there, though? Because, okay, it's the same company. And it's kind of, but you said, it's the same company that did it 20 years ago. Like, does that knowledge still exist in the company? How does a company then keep that quite specific knowledge over that time? You've said they've been working on it in different formats since then, Justin.
That's right. So it depends. So I think it's when it comes to Atari, maybe not, because Atari has been sold. It's basically owned by investors at this point, right? But NBA Jam, they partnered with Mark Turmell for the NBA Jam, those Midway games, because he's still in the industry. He's the CEO of a company, right? But he's that guy, Mortal Kombat, and NBA. I'm thinking of, like, do you remember NBA Jam? He was literally in the game if you put in like the cheat codes and stuff.
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so, he's still well involved, and he was a software dev back in the day, and now he's, like a manager of a company. But he's partnering. But I think I want to turn this conversation back around. There's still a lot. Maybe a way to do that is Arcade 1-Up is not perfect. A lot there. I recently got a comment on it. It was kind of interesting. I got a comment on my video, and he's like, "This is trash. I don't know why anyone would buy this. Just get a Mister and a BVM." It's that easy. It's that easy. And to be fair, sure, yeah. I mean, I think I have. So in my area, because this is why I got to become best friends with Steve. In my area, a PVM BVM did become available, and I missed it. Like I sat on it. It was like $400. It was in pretty good condition. It must have been a around 25-inch screen, like a 24-inch, and it was a Sony. And yeah, I missed it. It was one of those stories on Craigslist. The guy's like, my wife won't let me keep it anymore, but it's it's in great shape, and I should have pulled the trigger. So all I have for a PVM is the Sony Trinitron, like the real small one. What is it, like 9-inch screen? But that was basically for testing RGB. And then I have a Toshiba 25-inch. That's like a consumer grade, but it's got component. It's pretty nice. And then everything else I have are arcade monitors.
Now, is that 25-inch one, is it the flat screen one, or is it the bubble screen?
Bubble screen.
Okay. Yeah, Try, from around the time of the trip, dropped off one to be serviced, and it's a flat screen one. So I've not done anything on that specifically yet, so that should be something exciting that is a different type. But personally, I always like that's more bubble, less flat screen.
By bubble, you mean old school, more rounded edges?
Yeah, like the Trinitron, like the end flat screen CRT where it was actual true flat tube. Most of the time, I prefer the older one where it's actually got some kind of a curve to the screen.
Yeah, sure.
For the image, but that's just personally. But people do often ask about the opinions on the other two, but that's another discussion. Where were we going to tie this all back to, though, Justin?
So
we're bringing it back
again?
to monitor. Yeah.
The three pillars of
Yes.
what's making the LCD more similar to a CRT. Let's go through the list again, right? So
we did
it's
lag,
right? Mm-hmm. And so there's some people that are working with manufacturers to show them there are ways to, and then some of that's in the scaling, right? So there's a lot of lag that's introduced in cheap scalers. As TVs, consumer TVs continue to get manufactured, they're stripping more and more features away from it. I think some of them don't even have. What did they have? They have component for a while, composite for a while. Then they got the little jacks, the little headphone-looking jacks that'll split that out because they're like, we don't want to spend the money on the components anymore, and no one uses them anyway. The second pillar was they talked about motion blur a lot. Motion blur actually being introduced on the LCD, giving you a bad experience. And I never used those terms. I'd never thought of that. But I do have the Samsung TV that is otherwise a great television. I have it like on a stand in my basement here. I love using it. But when I throw like anything, I have an NES RGB, whether it's the high def NES or analog NT or Mister, any of those devices onto it, Mario literally has a trail, and I'm like, I can't turn it off. And
So
it does affect the experience.
Sorry, what TV is that, Justin, that you got? You're saying you're getting the trail on? What sort of TV is it? Sorry, LCD.
An LCD, yeah, like a 2019 Samsung.
Oh, okay, so pretty recent. Still fairly recent. And you can definitely see a trail on that.
Yeah,
That's
it's like a
interesting.
trail on
You
the
can
character.
almost still get that effect on a CRT sometimes, with the tube, depending on its condition. But I think that the problem is specifically with the LCD, right? It's like maybe with the memory of the screen or something where it's like held in there longer. Because, again, the CRT is a completely different process and technology compared to what LCD is doing. And that process is not like with a CRT, the scan line's being drawn, and then it goes to the next line, and then it's being blacked out above and like being redrawn. So there's not this like memory time where the image stays there and then gets kind of pushed out, squeezed out. I don't know. This is just what I think. But what did they say more about motion blur?
I mean, they pointed the blame at the manufacturers of the LCDs, or I assume, this is my assumption, that it's actually in the scaler, it's in the logic that's trying to make, like, these TVs are designed for streaming apps and DVD players, Blu-ray players, those type of things. So just motion picture, they're thinking frames and movies and stuff like that. And by default, a lot of these TVs are not in game mode, which game mode is typically just, let's turn all of that processing off, right? And so I think some of these televisions, this is my assumption, some of these televisions, you just can't turn off that processing for certain features of the I don't know if it's in the panel itself, could be, like you were kind of implying, or it's in the processing of the signal.
Right, that's what surprised me, that you said it was only a 2019, and I was like, oh, really? There's like LCD ghosting or something like that? No, it's not. Like the early monitors, like when we were testing the old LCD, Steve, back here, the LCD PVM, that old stuff back with Bob, like that was real ghosting. There was some real ghosting artifacts, and I dare say that was coming from the actual LCD. The early LCDs just could not update as quickly, but a modern LCD... I don't know. It does sound like it is more and more likely to be part of the processing. And look, I know OLED is very, very fast, and black frame insertion will make that much better. But
right, so
I don't know.
The lag needs to be eliminated. Motion blur needs to be eliminated. And then the third pillar they talked about a lot was how to simulate scan lines, which in the last year we've had some huge improvements that I think mainly from Mike Chi, right? Or I don't know if he came up with it, but he's definitely putting it into his product. Like the idea of tricking the television to go into HDR mode and then feeding it. You basically can take advantage of the contrast that's introduced in HDR. And you can reproduce more realistic scanline effects when you have that. And I've only seen pictures of it, but it does look really promising.
That's interesting. I didn't know about that. That was, and is that a feature or a beta feature in the 5X RetroTink right now?
It's definitely something that is on RetroRGB. There's an article on it that came out just a few weeks ago, and it talks about HDR mode. I haven't tried it yet, so I don't know exactly how to do that. But again, the future is bright. Whether it's with LCD or CRTs, that's what I came away from the retro world, from a technology point of view, that I didn't know prior. It's kind of, there are people that are working on both sides of it, and it's not a competition. Like, I mean, I think we all own LCDs and CRTs. I don't know, Lewis, are you like anti-LCD or?
Not at all. Look, if you go to Zez Retro, I've got a whole video about how much I love 19 and 20-inch LCDs. I'm using it. This is a 20-inch LCD that I'm looking. 20-inch 4x3, and I've got it specifically because it's the last 4x3 and one of the biggest 4x3 LCDs that was made. And it's Dell, and it's 3 to 4 milliseconds, and I love it. I have multiple inputs, and I still have limited amounts of room here, so I don't have space for lots and lots of... I've got my beautiful... there's my 20-inch BVM over there, but
is that the Dell 2007 FBS or something?
Yes, the FB. That is, as much as I've one of the more common. It's not that super common, but it's most common of the final big 4x3s, and I managed to find
ultra
one
sharp
locally.
Dell Ultra Sharp.
The Ultra Sharp. It definitely is the IPS panel.
Yep.
Something I've heard some feedback from other people who are into these 20 inches that Dell fucked around a bit. Some are IPS, some are TN is the other terminology. TN. I think I've determined this is the IPS, so cool. So I'm down with all of that. I have a question, Justin, and maybe you can, I understand maybe you're not the expert, but you can help us understand. As a lot of people are doing this research, like Mike Chi, like Shank, into making an LCD look like a CRT. And it seems that, like, when I look at Mike Chi's screenshots, like, he's really to get that look, he's really replicating a CRT. Like, if you zoomed in on a CRT and then you zoomed in on Mike Chi's interpretation of it, it's the same thing. And is that the best way to approximate a CRT, or is there some other? Clearly, there's no more clever way to do it, and the top minds have worked out if you precisely replicate the way that 3 colors come together like that. Am I making sense here?
It makes sense. I don't know the answer is. My assumption is if you break down a problem and you have enough bits to reproduce that problem, right? Then you should be able to simulate it really well. So I would imagine that if you had enough lines of resolution, right, on an LCD panel that can literally even draw the different, like the scan lines themselves and how they like, imagine like a Google map, right? You go to a Google map, you just keep on zooming in, you keep on zooming in, you keep on zooming in, right? Like if you have like an 8K monitor, can't you dedicate essentially a single pixel to just have like, it's basically creating that blooming effect. And I'm assuming that Mike Chi, he's doing the best he can with the pixels that he's playing with. That's all I got.
I think that's a difficult thing because the reason, like, if you get down to it, the reason it looks like it does is an effect of the CRT technology. And so this new technology does it a different way. So now you have to try to make a whole new process of basically mimicking the effect that a CRT does on its own, right? Without any programming. Because it's like the retro gaming, for example, 240p, they took advantage of the fact that they could just draw half the lines, improve their resolution, leave the other half blank, and it gave this really cool scanline effect. And then at the same time, you keep zooming in a real sharp CRT. When you have the resolution kicked up to a progressive scan, you can really see then the individual beams, and sometimes it's easier to magnify it. So that whole you're just seeing more of what the TV is actually doing, or monitor, from the early days. And then now these LCDs are doing it a different way. They're not concerned about how the TV manufacturers are. So that leaves the challenge for Mike Chi, which I was really hoping he would be at the conference, but he wasn't this time. He was originally.
That's right.
And it was great to talk to him back then. But yeah, he's really dedicated and done a great job with his product. He should win like Retro Product of the Year if there was an award show or something.
It's interesting that we want the effort is to make our LCD look exactly like a CRT. And why do we want a CRT? Well, because that was some technology that people came up with. It's not like when the dudes were designing a CRT, I guess it was the first experiments, like, this is going to look the best for Mario. This is why I'll do it. No, they just made a technology. They're like, look,
they're just casting
TV.
shadows, basically.
We cast, look, I made a technology, I made a picture, and, we're like, oh, my, this is great. And now the next levels of technology are spending their time, or at least we're spending our time in the retro gaming community, making it look like it was before. And I get it as well. As a retro gamer, I feel it in my heart. Yeah, I look at those screenshots from Mike Chi and I'm like, ooh, that's nice. But why do I think it's nice? Why do I think an LCD panel looks better? Because it looks like some old technology before. And like, is there some, even
nostalgia.
Though the nostalgia, that's it. The retro panel, the LCD can look better
for the game, right? And maybe we should use this as a time to flip back around to some fun stories from the Expo, because I feel like nostalgia, we could really talk more about how we had some cool little things happen. And I could start with just the weird thing that I talked to Lewis about, where I had walked up and I was just randomly filming people doing things. I found a section that was all just Trinitrons that were 13 and 20 inches, and there was people playing a Tetris tournament. And there was just some guy on there that was probably 20 years old, and he literally had had maxed the score out, and there was a group of people behind him ringing a cowbell. Mm-hmm. And he was just, he had the controller upside down, and he was like doing this number on the back of it, and he had a Michael Jackson glove, and he was just doing it for minutes on end. And I didn't get to even see him stop. I was like, this is too much. I got to go back to the booth. But that was just something really odd. What was like something, maybe, do you have anything from the weekend?
Well, there was, what I've learned is like there's different generations, right? Shank, for an example, with his stories or the story that you told last time about, all the competition. He was trying to bring PVMs into the freaking Marriott lobby. Basically, when you walk into the Marriott, it's just this big open room, tile floor, and it's really wide and open. And we basically took over it. So, like, people would come in, and you could not dismiss that there's a gigantic CRT in the middle of this open space, right? So that was pretty cool. But so he's like a newer generation that we get to kind of see. He grew up on the Wii, right? I didn't grow up on the Wii. I had a Wii, but I was married when we bought a Wii, right? I was a grown-up. I was an adult. And so I have some memories about that. And I kind of got to relive some of that because when I first got the Wii and kind of those newer generations, which there was also a debate of whether or not, what is retro? And people are like, is Wii retro? Is Wii U retro? But anyway, I got to play a lot of Rock Band. So that they actually had like a Rock Band 4, which is a newer version, but it's a game that came out a while back, so I enjoyed that. But here's one of the things that I found was there was a lot of young kids at the Expo as well, and so they have like a whole new experience. So I'm there with Mason Conrad, who's a camera guy. He shoots for a show called Chasing Nostalgia, and he's a friend of ours, and he does thumbnails on YouTube. And he was a kid YouTuber, so even talking to him, like, he became a YouTuber when he was like 14 and gained 10,000 subscribers covering Nintendo. And then he stopped and realized what he loves doing is editing videos and making thumbnails, and now that's what he does for a career. So that's an interesting thing where he pivoted, where literally he bought a house recently on, based on his business that he created in the last 2 or 3 years. And what's funny is he bought that house, and 90% of his customers, should I say 90%? Maybe it's a little less. 70% of his customers are in the home arcade YouTube space, which is kind of an interesting thing. Like he has like 5 or 6 customers that are big 1 million YouTubers that do like they do like a food channel where they just stuff their face for 10 minutes. So he does thumbnails on that, but that's kind of an interesting story. So there's like we sat down and played Smash together. And so he was reliving this experience of, playing Smash with his mom in the early 2000s, but with me. But then we ran across this kid that was like 9 years old, I want to say. And he sees Mason with a camera. And I say to Mason, hey, film this lady. And it was his mom, because I saw she was playing Super Mario Brothers, the original one, on Nintendo, and she was at 8-4. And she had just died, and she had 5 lives. So to me, she's just about to beat this game, because if she's made it to 8-4 and she has 5 lives, like, even if she warped, she got a couple 1-ups on the way, right? I was like, she can beat this. And I thought this would be good B-roll for my video, right? I'm like, so shoot the mom. And so he's filming, and she's dying. She's trying to get to the end, and she knows how to go back to the pipe and all that on 8-4. And this little 9-year-old kid gets out of his seat and looks up at us and goes, "Are you guys YouTubers?" We're like, yeah, we are. He's like, "I got a YouTube channel." Like, really? So we're being really nice, and I want to start a conversation, and I've learned, like, doing podcasts, interviewing people, like, you got to get a list of questions in your head, right? Like, you don't want to, like, keep it stale. So I'm applying that to this kid. I'm like, oh, should I go towards what type of content he makes or how he makes the content? So I decided how he makes the content. I'm like, what editor do you use? And he just starts naming off his editor. Do you make your own thumbnails? He's like, yeah, I make my own thumbnails. I use this software. I'm like, he knows what he's talking about, right? We're like, oh, what's the name of your channel? He's like, Chunky Monkey. And then he's describing, I was like, what do you do? He's like, I basically play video games, but I can't show my face because I'm not 13. And so he's dealing with this whole thing where he's a video game. He loves video games, but he's also a content creator, and he's 9. And I'm thinking to myself, we were kind of like that. Like, I don't know about you guys. Like, I had, my parents had a camera, but I didn't have any place to publish my home videos, right? Did you guys make home videos when you were kids?
I mean, I personally made some with a good friend, like his parents were into like that was their thing, and so he always had this big fancy expensive computer back in the mid 90s, and then he had like a camera that we could go and take footage from, and we would make the stupidest like homemade versions of bad music videos from like VH1 and stuff. And so there's this awful stuff that we'll go back to his house like once every 10 years, his parents' house, and just watch these things. They're just so ridiculous. And yeah, that was that, and I always laugh because there was nowhere for us to put any of this stuff. I've got a terrible story about one video that we made. It was supposed to be a ripoff of the original Dune movie because we liked it, and this was when nobody liked it in the 90s, and we were in high school. And my friend's dad had a bunch of these wetsuits because he was like into skiing and like surfing in wetsuits. So we were running around like in the woods with these wetsuits on, filming each other. And our whole thing was we were calling it Poon instead of Dune. And it was our like porn joke version of Dune. But then we were always like too chicken to like talk to any like chick to get in the movie. So it's like all we did was we filmed probably 5 minutes of us going around with like these weird Dune scenes, like we're trying to play really cool, and like, you know, mentally we'll do a voiceover of something like and so but that was definitely a lot of fun back in the day.
I want to see you upload those videos. This is what you should do. You should
we got to see it. Poon starring Steve Nutter.
But we should do do like a reaction video. So like you're on screen and it's like you're watching your own home video and reacting to it live or whatever. That'd be cool.
I remember our poor friend looked like Chunk from like the Goonies, and so we would always make fun of him and make him do stuff. We made another Goonies 3 or something or 2, and it was just terrible, us running around our friend's house. I remember we told him, we like locked him in a closet. We were like filming us. So we were like, oh, you got to try to really get out, you know, like Chunk would. And he like ran into the closet door and no joke split the thing in half and fell through. And my parents were pissed. You know, we just like blew through a door in their house just to make a stupid video.
So I got a question for you, Steve. So in the 90s, when you were growing up, did you wear jackets like that?
Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, I lost all my originals, but recently I was able to acquire this lovely... Anybody who's actually watching on YouTube can see the 3-tone 1990s windbreaker I found over the weekend.
You're either a 16-year-old or a father. Guess which one
right.
you are.
It's so funny because I drove my kid to middle school, and my wife's like, oh, he doesn't think I'm cool anymore. And like, I'll drive him, and he's like, oh, yeah, this is cool. Like a cool jacket, Dad. All right. And it just makes my wife roll her eyes, you know, cringe and looking at me in this thing.
You're trying to I'm one of the cool kids. Yeah. Hello, fellow children.
What can I say? It's like, you know, the stuff like this, I got it from, so quick story about where I got it. Let's go. And over the weekend, which was just Labor Day weekend here in the United States, we've got a short holiday. I went to my family's lake house about 2 hours away from here. And unfortunately, there's the neighbors that lived there for like 30 years next door to him. The man or the husband passed away. I mean, he's in his, you know, almost 90, I want to say. Mm-hmm. And so my the wife was just cleaning stuff out of the house, and my mom was like, look, she's going through some stuff. She has a bunch of these comic books, and she'd like to give them to you to look through. And I was like, okay, sure. She's like, oh yeah, she's been collecting. He was collecting since World War II. And so, of course, my son was listening, and his eyes got all big, like we were going to find some gold. And I was like, just relax. I was like, a lot of times it's just honestly junk, and unfortunately that's what it was. I went over and picked up 5 boxes of junk comic books from the 90s pretty much, and then not a single, like, I went through all the boxes, nothing really. I just left it all there. But when I first went in there, she was like, oh, my husband has all these amazing jackets, right? And please, would you take some of them? And so I was like almost feeling like, you know, pressured into taking something. And I was like, what? I don't want any of these clothes. I don't want to be rude, though. So what do I actually take from this? So I started grabbing these, these like really cool 90s, like mint condition pullovers. So I've got one more. Maybe I'll surprise everybody and do a costume change after a little bit.
So
But
this
that's how
old
I
guy,
acquired
this came from a
this amazing
90-year-old guy.
Yeah, it even smells like him. You know, it's got his scent.
God.
You haven't washed it?
I haven't. Of course, I haven't washed
washed
it,
it?
Lewis.
You
Are you
washed it?
kidding?
Came from an old guy.
What if he died in that jacket?
Maybe that's why his wife was like starting to cry when I started to say this one and like pull it down. I was like, no, not that one. Anyone but that one. Oh goodness, I think we just
Did we lose Lewis?
yeah, we might have. Hang on. Because then he'll have to piece it together again. Oh, here he comes, maybe.
It's okay, I'm
Sure
back.
recording. Okay. It doesn't say that anything stopped recording, so
You know what I
just have a
did?
hiccup.
I slammed. It was so funny. I slammed the table, and that's like
for it to recover.
disconnected some USB device on my computer.
I hope it's still going, but it says, yeah, you and 3 others, so it may just be a blank screen for a little bit, but that's okay.
Yeah, I see a recording still here. I mean, I guess I had to.
so I mean that was the weekend was like build up to that, and then the best thing I got was this jacket. So it's I love it. It's the same colors as like the college around here that I go to see games.
You look really cool.
And so next time I get kicked out of a college sporting event, I can be in this nice, comfortable jacket. Because that's actually happened too, Justin, sadly.
Really? Well, you definitely have some Dave Coulier vibes going on for sure. I wonder if that makes you feel good. It's like growing up, did you ever know that when you hit close to your 40s, you're going to look and even dress like Dave Coulier?
There could be worse things, I guess. Oh, no, we popped him out.
All right, let's...
Now he's popped God.
wait
Oh.
for-
I don't know.
We can wait for
Well, at least
Lewis
we got the
to
first
end
hour
this,
down. And now we could just
everything
Yeah,
reassemble
right.
this as it usually goes back and forth.
It's a good.
It
At
does
least it
l-
ended at like the good
You lost him.
point.
Is it-
Even
is-
you,
is it
Steve,
warm?
Are
Is
you?
that jacket
Am I
warm?
blurry to you?
No,
Steve?
it's super thin. It's like just a rain. It's LL Bean, so it's not. It's like a nice
okay.
kind of. Isn't that fun? Well, wait for him to come back. I'm gonna go switch.
Yeah,
it
we'll
up.
wait for-
I'm gonna go change jackets.
Okay, go.
It'll be a good scene cut marker if anything happens.
I'm going to have to edit the podcast from here. Everyone's left me. Justin's left. Steve's left. We have all sorts of problems. Someone drops out and the recording doesn't work. Look, if you are one of our listeners week in, week out, you know that there's always some kind of issue happening here. So Justin's dropped off. We don't know where he is. So I don't know. Yeah, we're just... Yeah, it's just a casual chat. Thanks very much for listening. I know we haven't been around for a while. I've been moving and I have a whole bunch of stuff in my life that I need to sort out. I was told, yo, look at this guy. Oh my God, the 90s are back. It's beautiful.
Hey, what's happening? Yeah.
Yeah, that's
go for a jog.
the design on the sleeve. This really makes it.
I know, that's what I saw, and I was like, "Oh, what the
Little
heck?"
fluoro thing there.
Yeah.
So you saw those jackets. Oh, so the lady was like, have jackets,
Have jackets, please take some jackets. And I was like, God, I don't really want any of these guys' jackets. It's like normal fleeces and like flannel shirts, things I don't want, right? I'm like, I don't. I'm like, am I being a jerk if I just take this guy's stuff and go straight to the dump and then?
No, you take him to the Goodwill or something.
Yeah.
right?
Well, I
Maybe you
meant,
could,
yeah, some of this stuff I couldn't even. I don't know. Even the. Well, I guess you could donate them somewhere, but yeah.
Well, you just take it there, and then they can
They
choose
deal
to
with
throw them out. I don't understand how the Goodwill kind of works. I just take my
No,
shit
they
there, and
probably
I
just.
assume.
Well,
that-
I wouldn't take this there. This is gold, baby. Look at this. I mean, I could just be jogging.
You gotta
down
sell
the-
that on
jog-
eBay,
I
baby.
could be jogging down Tony Soprano's neighborhood,
This
back
is
in
true.
1996 or whatever. So I don't know if Justin will be able to come back here, but we'll
Yeah,
we'll see if he's
we can
sending any messages. But this has
finish
been
it off. You get anything there?
this has been fun. I don't know if he'll be able to come back.
Yeah,
or
we did
not.
sort of
Let's
just a
sort of
casual
try.
chat. It's nice.
Yeah. So, Justin's got a great channel. If he doesn't even be able to make it back, just to give you a quick note, have watched him for a long time. He does a lot of live shows, and they are a lot of fun. He has a good style that makes a lot of times you'll sit on a live stream and you don't know whether it's happening yet. It's harder to watch a playback of. His really aren't like that. So definitely check it out. especially if you're into the one-up arcade things at all.
He has a good
He's
voice
the
as
expert.
well. Listening already to this podcast, I'm like, dang, that's a good presenter's voice. Like, it's smooth.
I was hoping he would come back because he told me that his brother was in a band that is pretty big. Oh, maybe he's coming back here. I don't know.
Oh, here we go.
There we go. Okay.
Justin.
Hold on. I rejoined is what I did.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah. We're fine.
would-
Now we have four
Steve was
others.
making outrageous claims that your brother's in some band or something like that. What band is this?
Yeah, I guess I,
don't know
could
if
tell
it's a
that
secret.
story.
I didn't say anything else besides maybe,
Maybe.
because he was talking about how great your voice was.
I was complimenting it. Like, it's so smooth and it's real nice. So we'll butter you up and then go for the more difficult family story then. Is there what's up? Are your brothers in a band?
Yeah, so growing up, my brother and I played music, and so we were in a band together, and then he started helping out other bands in the Des Moines area. So he became sort of a producer / like when they would go on to do shows, he was like a drum tech, a guitar tech. He was just always helping out on the shows. And so the main band that he was working for when he was about, maybe 18, 19 years old, and I was like 16 years old at the time, ended up becoming a really big band called Slipknot. And so there was an era where they went to the studio. My brother was there helping them out with the studio. They recorded 4 songs, and then they gave that to Roadrunner Records and a couple other record companies, and then they got signed. And around that time, there was some shift in band members. And so my brother joined the band for a couple concerts, and he came up with a mask. And I remember it, like, my brother, he was like, I got to come up with a mask because there's this rule that everyone has to, we can't use a mask from the previous drummer, because even though the band wasn't even, like, big yet, and so he came up with this. We were looking at magazines for masks, and we saw one that kind of resembled Pinocchio, this really long nose. And him, myself, and wife were like, oh, it should be that. But then, so we came up with this. We had this top mask, but then we were like, oh, should the face be empty? And they're like, no, let's use black latex. And so the 3 of us kind of designed this mask. And then my brother was, played a couple shows with them, but ultimately he was like, I want to be a producer. I don't want to be in the band. And so I guess he quit the band. I guess it wasn't really a quit. It was always supposed to be like this temporary thing, but they changed the rule when they finally got the drummer. They're like, we can keep Brandon's mask design. And that became, iconic for the band. Like, even their first album, that main character right in the front, and they even, I remember there was an image of the album that showed my brother just with the nose coming straight out. And they decided to have him turn his head, and they used that shot because they wanted everyone to see, like, the nose. And so there's some good stories early, growing up around bands. I was able to go to Ozfest on tour with them. They were super nice. They gave me, kind of like Steve had this Retro World All Access Pass, I was able to get an All Access Pass to Ozfest in 98, 99. And I got to meet System of a Down, my favorite band at the time, Deftones, Primus. I got to eat with them. So I'm sitting there at a table with Jack Osborne just to the across from me, and he's like 12 years old at the time. We're all talking about Star Wars, right? We're like, oh, Star Wars is coming out, The Phantom Menace, and don't tell me I haven't seen it yet, And Jack Osborne's like, I already saw it. I saw it at Lucas. I saw it at Skywalker Ranch a couple weeks ago with my dad, and we were all joking about how, it was a funny story. He says, we're like, of course you've seen it already, and of course you saw it with George Lucas. And he's like, what is that supposed to mean? Of course, this British kid saying this. And we're like, your dad's Aussie. And I kid you not, he goes, I don't need the spirits of the demons to get what I want. And we're like, no, your dad's rich.
He believes it, hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah, 100%. Yes.
How are you tell me, Justin, when you're around those sort of people, how did you, I know you sort of, your brother and your connection to that, and then through Slipknot, you've got an access and you're hanging out. How did you feel, And I'm asking you this because I deal with, in my work, famous people all the time. And so I was saying to, was I saying here in the recording anyway, that my company and I are presenting John Cleese in the next coming days, and that's why I have zero time to do anything else because I'm working on that. But even when I'll meet someone who's famous in another country and I feel, I don't know, I can feel talent and I'm sensitive to it, and I can feel someone's really talented, and I don't know, it's almost like an aura they have. And I wouldn't say I'm intimidated around such people, but I'm definitely cautious and wanting to respect. And I guess that means that I'm never quite at ease. So in that situation, when you're dining with Jack, Osborne, and there's all these famous people there, how did you feel in that moment?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I've had the opportunity to be that a few times. And recently was at Retro World Expo. We go there, and I felt that uneasiness around Norman, gaming historian. We're there at the Marriott, and all of a sudden, just like gaming historian walks in. He's like 6'1" or whatever. Is like has a presence, and you're like, oh, this is the guy I've seen a lot for over a decade, right? And I was intimidated, perhaps was the word. Like there's all these other people there that are maybe not as famous YouTubers, but like they're My Life in Gaming, or they're pretty big, but we're like shooting the breeze with them, no big deal. But I didn't want to go up and talk to him because I bet he gets it all the time. And there's a similar feeling with musicians that I met, but here's the difference, and I think maybe you can appreciate this. So when I was at Ozfest, my brother was awesome. He had already met like everyone, knew everyone first name basis, and the guy from Slipknot, Sean Cran, who's the clown, he's basically the CEO of Slipknot. And keep in mind, I'm like 17 years old at the time, right? And these guys are way older than me. Sean's like, and now he's probably 50s to 60s, right? So much older than me. And they're like being really kind. They're like, you gotta come meet this person, you got to come meet this person. And then so I was never starstruck with some of these people because they're like, they're saying to me, this is a buddy of ours. He's cool, right? And I'm shaking hands with celebrities. It was because of the connection that I had. And in the retro world, when I met some people, Bob introduced me or Steve introduced me to Shank or to Corey, and they're like, oh yeah, he's one of us, and that made me feel really comfortable. But when you're just by yourself and all of a sudden the celebrity goes by and you have an opportunity to talk to them, if you don't have that networking connection, like,
sure,
it's that weird,
you don't have that.
It's a weird awkwardness.
I think it doesn't have to be about like you said, you felt that when you saw the gaming historian, and I think it doesn't have to be. It's not a strict hierarchy of like this person is most famous, so therefore you feel the most intimidated or most whatever, let's say uneasy or weird, and it's not because of that person. I'm very sure Norman is a super cool dude, no doubt. Right. And it's not that. It's something that you as an individual put out yourself, right? There's no reason. Like Steve is buddies with Try, right, from My Life in Gaming,
right?
And no doubt, if I met him, Steve would probably introduce me, and it'd be cool. But still, I'd be like, those guys. And even I feel a little bit of how to say, maybe a little bit imposter syndrome. Sure. And I know that's a thing, and I don't know if that's another way to describe this same thing. Why we are comfortable with one person not. I definitely feel it because Steve, first of all, Steve's the one with 20,000 subs, not me. And Steve's the one who's met people. And, people have now watched this podcast, and I'm very thankful that those, many people in the industry maybe at least know who Zez is. But what does Zez do? Zez just talks with Steve. So Zez has to make his own way as well in these things. And it's fine, Steve. I see you shaking your head. And that's fine because I understand that my point is irrational. It's an irrational thing, and it's irrationally assigned to some people and not other people. I'm really sure I'm going to come to Retro World, and someone or other, I'm going to be like, yeah. I know I will.
Yeah, that's absolutely. And this is a great thing to talk about because we've all just been kind of experiencing this, and it's the same thing for me. There were some people See, I don't know. I'm a little bit of a different social character sometimes, where I'll just like, yeah. So like, I will go to these situations and I will try to get myself amped up to be like outgoing and try my hardest to try to not be fake, but to be myself and comfortable and make certain people comfortable. And then I will go to that event and I will try to go. I want an opportunity to try to speak with as many people that are there that I can. So I would go and try to talk with people for a little bit, and then I'd honestly like sneak out of the conversation eventually and go. And so I was doing this with all kinds of everybody in this, basically our group, to try to make a connection with them on a personal level so they know that. But there were times where a good example was I was talking with Corey and Mark, and they were like, come over here and meet Game Dave, which I'm not sure if anybody, you guys know Game Dave.
Yeah, I know that guy.
I didn't really know Game Dave, but I was like, sure, great, cool. And so, but this is a different example where sometimes, you go up to and you meet somebody and it's not anything like you have a different bad feeling of a conversation, but somebody like, he was extremely funny and like outgoing and telling these great stories where, sometimes you go up and you'll be introduced in a situation like that, and then you never really get an opportunity to talk, but that's okay. And so you wonder like, that really almost is nothing more than just an introduction to, for example, Game Dave. So like with him, I went later and I just like talked to him for 2 seconds at his booth right across from us. But at the same time, as like Justin said, right next to us was Norman and like a couple of other guys, that Pixel Dan and then this other gentleman, and I didn't really know him. Right. I mean, of course I knew Norman, the gaming historian, but at the same time, I don't know why I just didn't go over there myself to even say, hey, how's it going? I'm Steve, the CRT guy. Just wanted to say, hey.
Yeah, I bet you Norman wants his CRT fixed.
Well,
you never
either way, it's like, why not? And so there's still always that like, well, maybe he is like almost too big for me. And I'm not saying it's a right thing, right? You brought it up and I was almost laughing because it's like, well, I basically did the same thing. I just didn't think to even really talk about it. It just kind of blew over my head.
So we're all on our own levels. We all have our own level. I guess that's why it's sort of a rational, personal thing. We all have our own level of status, of feeling, and so forth. And then someone, of course, is always higher than us. No doubt, gaming historian looks at somebody and goes like, oh, geez, I could never talk to that guy, or whatever. You know what I mean? Yeah, Mr. Beast, or I don't know, whoever it might be. For me, I wonder if I've fallen into this idea as well, because in my life over the last 10 years, I've been both an artist. I perform, I get on stage, I do that, but I'm also the promoter. And the promoter is the one behind the scenes. The organizer isn't the talent. When I'm in that mode, I'm not the talent. And I'm thinking of things like probably before the pandemic, one of the last big comedians, we did Bill Burr locally here. And I want to say I probably shook hands with Bill Burr, and that's it. And I was the local promoter, putting him on in this city, putting him on in a couple cities, making it happen. Because, and again, no disrespect to that. Look, he's traveling from city to city. He meets a lot of people. I know you travel, you want to go home, you want to sleep, you don't want to talk. Right. I don't expect that, but it wasn't like, oh, I'm the promoter, and so we're all chummy and all of that. I got not much more than a fan did. I got a handshake and a hello and a thank you, and he was very nice. But then, he went to his backstage because he needs to chill and so forth. So, and I understand as well, like, he's got a manager and I need to, like, there's a hierarchy in the show business and I'm under his manager, so I need to chill. So that having those two roles, sometimes being the manager and the organizer, is different to being the talent. And at least you guys are all talent. But having said that, there's not many promoters or managers in YouTube content creation. We tend to be, until you get to a certain level.
Right.
So I don't know, like, I don't know if Norman travels, like, he's probably got someone helping him, booking him with his engagements, maybe someone booking stuff, but I don't know. That's a very interesting part. And it's something I've been fascinated about. When does this, I have all this knowledge about showbiz and big guy and how it works in comedy and entertainment and theater. And I've been trying to apply that to how it works with content creators and trying to work out how can the job of manager work with a content creator because that's not something typically we associate with a content creator, even though some probably do. Justin?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like a content creator by nature is independent, right? Like the platform itself is just something. You start pushing videos, you got probably no one helping you out, and the idea that at some point it actually does make sense to have someone promote for you. I mean, there could be a thing for it. My story was interesting. Steve was there, but I don't think Steve knows the story. So I'm sitting there talking to someone, really getting a great connection with this guy. I felt like long lost brother, separated at birth or twin, whatever you want to call it, right? But I don't really know who this guy is. You know, we're going on and on talking about this technology, that technology, and all of a sudden he's like, yeah, I've been thinking about changing my name because, like, I don't know, Displaced Gamer is just not... Maybe I made a bad choice on that name. And internally, I'm just, like, fanboying immediately, realizing that this person that I've been connecting with for the last 30 minutes, Chris, with Steve right there next to me, is one of my favorite content creators of all time. But I didn't know because I've never seen his face. He's a no-face content creator, right? But that was another experience at Retro World, and there was this moment where I was like nervous across from him. Like, I think I ran to the bathroom for a second. I was telling Mason later, I was like, I may have went to the bathroom nervously, right? But I came back and I was just like, hey, we're like already friends. Like we've created that bond. And then I don't know if you know the whole story, Steve, but I kept on running into him over and and over again, even at the airport. So we're at the airport. My flight got canceled. We had lunch together, right? We're all talking shop, whether it's about YouTube and the algorithm or just, you know, general content and creating content. And it was the first time I've ever heard anyone say this to me. I felt like very honored because he said, "Man, I've really enjoyed chatting with you. This is what Chris said. This is the first time in my life that I wish my flight was delayed too." Because he wanted to hang out longer, and we were having a really good time.
I like that point because I wonder, I kind of framed my discussion around, well, there's different levels and different statuses in the showbiz industry. But what you kind of tapped in, Justin, I feel, is that just the stupidness of adult men trying to make friends with one another. It's not about status. It's just two awkward adult men going like, oh, you're going to be my friend, but I'm an adult man. You're an adult man. We're going to be friends now.
You got to slip a paper to him. Do you want to be friends? Circle yes or no.
Want to be friends? Right. Because we're so dumb as adult men. We're so bad at making friends. Often,
I'm terrible.
Right?
Like moving to a new town, I was laughing. I was like, I'm awful at making friends. My kids can do it, but I'm terrible. That's what I was talking to Chris, because Chris moved to Nashville like a month before I had left, and we never met in person. That was the first time we had met in person, but we had talked for a long time behind the scenes for years, just through emails, messaging, and so then I saw him come in with Bob, and of course I jumped up and I was like, "Oh man, it's great to see you," and then of course he was a guy that I was like, give me your number. We're going to just make sure we hang out some. And we found out we were both going to be in town. A lot of people that they get to town and then like Saturday night comes and then they start leaving. People start leaving. And so we found out that we were going to be in town Sunday night. And I was like, he's like, you want to go just grab dinner somewhere? And I was like, absolutely. Yeah, let's get away from this after it's done and go grab dinner. And then I ran into Justin and Mason, and they were both like, well, we're going to be here. And I was like, well, let's all just go. The four of us to dinner. And I mean, that was like, it was funny because the four of us, again, none of us, I mean, I have talked to Justin again, probably 3 20-minute conversations in our life, maybe together. And then we all just ended up at dinner. And that was just like one of the highlights of the whole trip was this. I mean, we went to this fancy restaurant across the street and just got away from basically everything and sat there and it was quiet, nice, and we're able to sit there and just talk to each other. I mean, it was like a three-hour dinner. We were there, and so it really just turned into something that was like, a great something you don't really expect to happen. But then, like after that, of course, we're going to have a connection now to go forward. And that's kind of what I was saying to a lot of people there. I was like, hopefully one day we're all back coming to Hartford laughing about the last 5 years of just silly stories. And
With
then we just
epochs,
become these old
using his
weirdo
credit card.
Yeah, we just become these weird old Expo dudes that people just want to come up and say hey to.
Right, because that's the harder part of the friendships that we're forming in this circle as adult men, and we've got this common shared thing, and we're all content creators, we're doing things, but where most of us are not geographically that close, at least. Yes, you can meet once a year, but it's not, hey, it's Friday night, let's go have a beer, Justin and Steve, and get together down the pub. So we've got that disconnected nature, which makes it a little trickier too.
Yeah, you'll have to come next time, Lewis. Like, there's
I
been
know. 2
podcasts. Like, this is going to be a third one that's
Of
talking
this.
about retro world.
I know, but I was saying to Steve, not only is the John Cleese show coming, but the way that I make a bunch of my income here is by hosting events, like a company party or some conference or something. And August was hot. So I made a bunch of money. So I'm good because I haven't made a bunch of money for a while. So I needed to stay. Lewis would be much more poor if he came, notwithstanding the flights and all that. So I'm a bit, I wanted to meet all you guys, but I'm like, there's no way I'm missing out on that work.
That's good.
That
Yeah,
I'm
you can
finally
afford more
getting here after the
CRTs, right?
pandemic. Exactly. We just got this apartment. My girlfriend's like, we need a robot vacuum cleaner to go around the house. I'm like, well, I was like, do you need a robot?
Did you know what attracts dust? A giant CRT. Somehow it just all gets sucked inside there, and you never have to clean again.
It's
right?
all there. Because if I was a bit, skeptical about these little robot Roomba vacuums that go around the house, I was like, do we really need? But then it came down to, if I don't agree that we buy one of these, it's my job to vacuum forever into existence. And I'm like, okay, fine, buy the fucking robot.
Hey,
fine,
Justin,
I don't care.
it sounds like Lewis is starting to get whipped into that married life almost. You got to remember now, you're going to get these happy wife, happy life things. I'm like the most stubborn man, and I still, like my wife will even admit it. It's just like, I'm glad she puts up with me.
I just saw a tweet. So there's this company called At Games that I follow. They're in fact to circle way back. They're one of the companies that made those little crappy devices that were
the Mega Drive one, I think.
They did some good ones. They did some bad ones. I think their early version of the Mega Drive clone was poor. Then they came out with another one that was actually pretty good. But they did a lot of the joystick ones that you would find at Walgreens. So more recently, they've made home arcades. They have like a pinball machine that is actually pretty decent, 32-inch screen. So, but they're promoting it right now on Twitter, and so they made a tweet today, and I showed it to my wife, and it was really funny. So it's a picture of a pinball machine, and you look in the background, it's a kitchen, and it's a wife or a mother and a daughter, and the daughter's playing the pinball machine, and the wife is super happy. And I'm like, that's fake. There's like so many things wrong with that picture. One, why is there a pinball machine in their kitchen? In their kitchen.
Gosh.
I still showed it to my wife. She was like, I don't see the problem.
It works. Now you're gonna have a big run for mom and daughter.
So those
in the
pinball machines
kitchen.
they're making, are they, when you said 32-inch screen, is that like a digital pinball?
It's a
the
virtual pinball machine. So they take they have a ton of games actually. So they license I think they're close to 200 tables at this point that are virtually, it's all digital, and they recreate the experience using solenoids. And so when you hit the flipper, At Games has a couple different, there's like a really big speaker that will kind of like shake the cabinet, but Arcade 1-Up makes them as well, and they have solenoids in it. But there's mods that like people do to like increase the vibration to kind of, and it's weird. It's going back to that CRT simulating. There's that same type of simulation going on pinball, where if you get the right amount of knockers and shakers that can shake the machine when virtually the ball is moving around, you can somewhat recreate the experience. It's not the same though. Like, so there's this big debate of a lot of people in our space are moving towards like old school mechanical pinball machines, because if the ball is literally rolling down this, I mean, you can't, like, how It's probably even bigger separation between a CRT and an LCD. It's like physical ball moving around.
Sure, real ball moving around. Yeah.
Right,
How
versus
you
one
emulate
that's like
geometry properly and physics and all these other things, temperature, humidity, wood warp, crazy stuff. Even that's I was hoping maybe we get a chance to talk about pinball a little bit, because to me too, on these more modern machines, which I've not even seen one yet. I've seen a lot of the modern. We had talked about that were actually more on the professional, commercial, nicer side, but not the ones with the screens, because I would always too feel like it seems like do you get to see kind of like, do they add a lot of depth in that image somehow to make it look like it's almost sunk in, or is the actual screen sunk down a little bit into the frame of the machine?
It depends, right? So it depends on the person who's making the game. The actual game, some of them have nice shadows, and those shadows can kind of move if there's a tilt, or if you physically rock the machine, it senses that you're kind of tilting the machine, and so things can shake a little bit. And again, it gets you that virtual experience. Some of the cabinets, the LCD screen are flat. Like Arcade 1-Up has one where it's only a 24-inch screen. That's the downsize, but it is sunken in. And there's physical like wood that's kind of bringing it down, and it does add to the experience. There's mods online, and they're not commercially viable at this point, where like you wear glasses, and there's sensors on your glasses.
There was something like that.
It's not big and popular. There's a handful of content creators.
Wait, what do the glasses do again? Sorry,
okay.
It's
tracking your head. And so the game is moving based on your head. The moment that happens, and the guy actually, there's a couple of videos online of showing it from a camera's POV, right? Point of view. It looks real. The depth is there because all the items move with your head. So the illusion of depth is all there.
Wow.
But it's not there yet.
So
there's also, if you have, what is it called? An Oculus. There's some pinball games on that. And that one gives that, like you're standing in front of a pinball machine and you're in an arcade room, and as you move around, I mean, you're in a virtual world, so you can play. That one's really cool. You can actually play where your head is inside the machine, and that's actually fun. Like the ball's rolling towards your face, and you're at the point of view of the flippers, which is not humanly possible, but it's fun to play, actually.
Yeah, you're actually making me want to pull that Oculus out of storage, wherever it is right now.
You've got one, yeah.
my
So
kid got
pinball,
one.
this is going to sound like, and I grew up with pinball, so I love it. I remember the first time I had a girlfriend, and she said to me, "What's pinball?" And I went, "Oh, okay, all right, yes." So anyway, I've been there. But there are, like, when you said that they're recreating certain games, I think maybe that's just my ignorance of pinball, because, like, is there a game, like, I don't know any games in pinball, like, oh, it's that Indiana Jones game, or it's that, I don't know, the Addams Family game. I'm trying to think of random movie franchises that I've seen it. And they're actual established games, like there would be a Mario game and a Sonic game, and they're established games that a pinball expert has created. Because I just go, they fucking whack some shit on a pinball board and make it work. But it's actually really like, that's the classic pinball from 1992 sort of thing.
Yeah, it'd be like, just as much as you know the first 3 or 4 pipes and how high they should be and when the next, where the 1-up is on Mario World 1-1, if someone recreated that and got it wrong, you would call it out. Now, I'm sure there's an analog to that in pinball, but I know for sure they've also created other tables that are it's just themed and someone else recreated the game. I'm not too deep into it yet. Like, I don't own a physical pinball machine, but I've been playing a lot of physical pinball recently. Stern is still, every year coming out with new machines. I've been eyeing this Jurassic Park. I think it's going to be the one that I end up getting. Cool. It's a great game, great franchise, right? And you can get them brand new. They're pretty expensive, though. But
it's a full-size table?
Full-size table. But that game just has so much, like, when you lose, just like the way it adds up the points, like it's just this boom, 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 and the LCD, that has an LCD on it, was doing the scoreboard, right? And it shows like how many points you got in this, how many points you got that, and there's a final score. There's a T-Rex that can come out and like grab your ball and stuff. I mean, it's just fantastic. And there's a Godzilla that a lot of people are freaking out about. I've been playing that. I need to play the premium because Stern has Pro, Premium, and Limited Edition. They have 3 models. The Pro is the least expensive, but doesn't have all the cool gadgets. Once you get into Premium, now it's like on the Godzilla, the building shakes and falls over, and it like has all these special effects. And so you're not going to get all of that perfectly reproduced in a virtual pinball. But like At Games has like Space Invaders, which is kind of cool. Like you're playing the Space Invaders board, but it's doing things that couldn't be done on a real pinball, right? So it's like aliens start attacking you and coming closer, like floating on the screen, and you're hitting it with the ball, and that's just not possible in a normal pinball. So it's more of a video game. The virtual is more of a video game, I would say.
That's very cool. And then just to piggyback off that a little bit, Lewis, there's been scenes almost, just like the CRT or any gaming scene. There's been pinball scenes because the conference that I first started going to in Nashville was born out of pinball. It was all pinball and slightly arcade. And so there was always a huge new pinball theme stuff there. And that's why I talked to Justin for a little bit about it, how I had actually seen some of these newer, bigger machines, but not even some of the commercial stuff. But they're quite impressive. But not only that, there are games that are like legacy games that they have competitions for. And like there will be competition rooms and like time scores, balls. And some of these guys will like miss stuff on certain levels, and then they just walk away from the machine because they know they're screwed. They've been doing it for 25 years. They're like, great, and it's like really interesting because again, it's this whole thing. It's like if you go and you find the guys who are great at whatever, just like some version of pool, and it's like the tournament, and they're all into it. That's what they do. It's the same kind of thing with like pinball games, certain ones.
But
is it the same that people would? I'm trying to think of an analogy in video games. Let's take maybe shmups, and someone who is uneducated, who doesn't know about the history of shmups and the different forms of shmups. There's Toho, and then there's Bullet Hell, and then there's old school kind of regular. They just see someone uneducated might just go, well, they're all these vertical shooting games. What are you talking about? And I think that's the way I see pinball. I'm like, well, I walk in and there's a pinball machine, and yes, it's got a Indiana Jones theme to it. Not understanding this is the classic Indiana Jones that came out associated with a movie in 1984, and loads of people have played it. And I would think that you could pick up any pinball game and just start playing it, but maybe someone looks at any shmup and says, oh, you could pick up any shmup and start playing it. Why do you need it? And I know, no, you need to study that shit for many, many, many hundreds of hours to get it right. Is that what pinball? Is that a good analogy, do you think, Justin?
I'm not a pinball expert to say for sure. What I've heard people say is, the author of that table. Oh, do you know so-and-so author made that table? He's amazing, but this one's not as popular. But another way to look at it so virtual pinball would be akin to playing retro video games on an LCD. You can go buy an LCD for $200, right? Like go to the local store and get a 24-inch for $100, $200. In the virtual pinball, there's these miniature ones that you can get for only a few $100s that they're tabletop versions, and they try to recreate that video game experience with a small screen. There's a virtual pinball machine that's big. It's not full size like your arcade one up at your At Games. Those run from $500 to $1,000, so that can get you into the space, right? But here's where the analogy goes crazy, and this is why it's pretty exciting. Man, it would be great if they still made CRTs, right? Like imagine if there were still manufacturers out there that were actually producing brand new CRTs. Well, there's companies that are making brand new pinball machines still to this day, but they cost about $9,000. But they're actually, in a lot of times, now someone may scold me for saying this, but better than those from 20 years ago. So if, as an example, if you go look and do research, you want that Back to the Future Data East pinball machine. It's pretty expensive, but it's also 20 years old, right? Do you, going to Steve, have the experience and understanding to be able to replace the caps on a CRT? There's probably same level of training and experience, probably data more available out there with pinball, but you're going to have to know like how to repair that old pinball machine, you may be able to get it at a discount, and the reason is because it needs repaired. Whereas you can get a brand new Stern and you're good. And keep in mind, this is what's pulling me into this idea of buying a Stern. They keep their value, which is crazy. So now it's almost like an investment because it's not really going to lose its value like a car. Like if you want to go buy a 5-year-old Stern machine, it's still $10,000 for those machines. If I bought a car for $10,000 5 years ago, it's not worth $5,000 now. So that's interesting. A lot of these are commercial products. They're made to go into a commercial establishment, but you're going to buy it and you're a collector. So there's actually, like, when you resell these pinball machines, you're like, I'm a collector. They're kind of more valuable because only you played that machine. It's like if it had mileage on it, it probably only has like 5,000 miles on it. That's kept its value. Where if it was in a commercial establishment, like it's got a lot of miles on it. So I don't know. I'm kind of getting pulled in with you add it all up together. You're like, man, owning a pinball
There's some
machine.
analogy there because I've been trying to draw this analogy with CRTs over several episodes and I'm still not done with it. Yeah. And I've been going for the classic car analogy, but there is something as well. I don't want to say that when you buy a PVM or a BVM, I don't want to say it's an investment. I don't want to say it's definitely holding its value, but I will say that your average person of our age and our status who is using it will be using it less than it was used originally in a professional broadcast studio.
That's fair.
Of
That's
course.
fair.
After a few years, it may not. If it was in good condition, maybe someone like Steve's done even if they've done a recap or just made, it'll still, I don't say it'll investment, but I also don't think your PVM is going down in value, at least not in this market. Anyway, so I guess that's a similarity to the pinball machine. Go, Steve.
Well, I was going to say, even if it was your full-time job to play video games on your one Sony PVM every week, you never took a week off, you worked 40 hours, you were dedicated to this wonderful job, you're only going to put 2,000 hours of use on the monitor. And so you'd have to do that for 5 years to put 10,000 hours on something. That's what I'm saying. Like and I'm thankful, but I've been doing this now for 6 years, and nobody's ever said, "Hey, my PVM died." Right? Thankfully, I mean, it might eventually happen, but again, we're getting to the point now where like, okay, well, if you got it 6 years ago, that's 10,000 hours probably. If you, or not entirely, but you can see the point where a commercial environment is constantly using that piece of equipment because it's invested in to be used as the commercial product. And then depending on what it's being used for, they're going to use the crap out of it. So like if you're trying to make money off a Stern machine that you pinball, you just put 10 grand in and you're a business owner, you're wanting to try to get everybody in town to come down and put their quarters into your machine to give you that money back. Whereas if you're a collector who buys it, you're babying this machine. You're coming in the end of the week. You're going to spend 2 hours a day,
that's right,
maybe playing on it at the most for a while. And like you say, then it just becomes really a showpiece, cool item that you have where you can go get this awesome experience anytime you want. Mm-hmm. And then like
your friends
if
come
you
over,
come into some reason, you're like, oh my gosh, I need to get rid of something and I need like 10 grand because I don't know what happened. But anyway, it's right there, and it, like, I guarantee you there's a wait right now to probably get a new Stern machine. You don't just get one, right?
That's right.
So that if you're selling one used, you're like, oh, well, I can go get this brand new, practically used new one right now from Justin,
it's a year wait
who's
right
only
now.
put 100 hours on it.
Yeah, and to your point, Lewis, about the analogy, I've been thinking about this recently. I'm going to break the fourth wall just for a second. You could probably tell me better than this, but comedy, when comedians are first working on their bit, right? They go, they're trying out their bit, and they kind of evolve it over time. And then when they kind of reach the point where they're going to come out with their special, that's when all their bits are figured out. But they kind of have to repeat it over time. And I think there's an analogy to that with podcasts, where I've done it, where you have a season of podcasts, and you're basically working out this bit and weaving it in through your content. And I've seen that with you. You're like, the car analogy, it's your bit, right? You're working it. And you're like, pretty soon you'll have your special, and you're like, hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about CRTs, and you'll have your
car. I was working on that. I was trying to think, should I make a video about the analogy? And then I realized I really don't know enough about. I think I know about the classic car market, but I don't really know. And that's when I think we were going to have, Steve and I were chatting, that I wanted to have on the Handlebar Gamer. Because he's got that, I think it's that 64 Impala, and he clearly knows what's up. So I'm like, I want to get that dude on to be like, he knows something about classic cars, knows something about retro. Bam, this is my guy. We're going to break this analogy down. Everyone's going to be sick of it. Because I guess I'm looking for, what I'm trying to do is find this analogy that will help us understand the CRT market. It is very small, but what can we learn from how things are going? So, look, if someone else has a better analogy, tell me. I will take it in. I'll drive that instead.
I like the car analogy. For me, it works. My grandfather worked on trains. And then my father worked on cars, and I work on computers. And I've always said, like, hey, when my grandfather was in his 20s, trains were where it was at, right? Yeah. He was an engineer, right? My dad's a mechanic from the 80s and 90s. And then my generation is, I got to work on computers. So I work for Disney. I work on the streaming app. So it's like, when I talk to my dad about shop, he's talking about working on Mercedes like he did. And I'm like, well, I work for one of the top streaming companies out there, and this is the technology that we're working on to shave the bits. And it's like, we can talk shop, but it's in different areas, right? So the analogy to classic cars has been something that I've used for many things because of my father, right? And so he bought and sold cars as I was growing up. And it's actually, there's multiple things about it. It's like, I've also used that analogy for retro gaming and my dad, because my dad was like, he did technology, like I do technology for a living, right? Like my dad worked at places, but he also restored for himself. And so retro gaming is kind of like the hardware side of the technology for me. Early on in my career, I did a lot of soldering. I got paid to solder, and it was part of my job. I did more hardware stuff. But as I started leaning more into software, there was this huge gap where it was like, all I'm doing is writing code for streaming apps, and like, even my latest job is mainly UI work, right? So it's like, where do we put the tiles on the screen, and what happens when you click on it? We're architecting all of that. So it's even like, it's still a lot of code, but it's like less and less hardware. And I'm like, this is where like the hobby of, modding arcade one-ups, or even assembling them, or, HD, adding HD to an NES with a high-def NES, it was like, gave me back that hardware side, right? And I think to myself, I'm like, well, this is no different than my dad, right? Who would be like, okay, yeah, I'm working on this car. I'm changing the oil on a car every day. I'm doing 50, however many a day, but I'm restoring a 1962 whatever, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder about very similar. My father worked on cars as well. Maybe it's look, and no doubt there are many people of our generation who work on cars and so forth, but I see it's a common trend. Like, that's, as you said, that's what they did back then. They didn't have a computer to work on then. Right. They didn't, and before that, your grandfather didn't have a car to work on. He only had a train. So
a real quick story about my dad. When I was a kid and I had a Nintendo, it broke. It stopped working. And I was like, Dad, my Nintendo doesn't work. I put the cartridge in. I just don't know what to do, right? I was like maybe 8 years old. And he goes, let me take a look at it. And he grabs the cart, looks at it, and goes, that's an edge conductor. Yeah, we use this in cars. And he goes, looks inside the Nintendo. He goes, yeah, that's the socket it goes into. He goes, this is what you need. Get a Q-tip and rubbing alcohol. And I want you to clean all of your cartridges. And then I want you to go in there. See those edge connectors? Like, you're going to go through. We're going to take apart the Nintendo. And he told me how to do it. He was like, take each of those pins and move them down. Make sure that game can get in there really well. And you need to clean with a Q-tip and rubbing alcohol every single one of those things. You put it all together, it's going to work. And it worked. And I was like, years later, looking back, I'm like, my dad knew how to repair a Nintendo before people knew how to repair Nintendos. Like, that is like the technique that's generally what people use. And it's because it was the same connector that was used in cars. It was, yeah, I thought it was always a good story.
That's awesome. I spent like a decade pretending to be a insurance agent. And I hated it, and that's just half the reason that I started getting into CRTs. prior to that, I was in construction, and I had an engineering degree specifically geared towards the concrete business. And then the housing market crash happened, and it was really hard to even stay in that business, and very much like you were doing it at your own detriment, like for a while, right? It was taking this economy had gotten so big, and it was going so far backwards that just trying to stay in it, you're like compromising. Oh, you got to take less money. Oh, you got to, work more hours. You got to do a worse job, a harder job or something. And so I just, had to take basically a time out and find something else to do when I was doing it. But I always, I couldn't sit there and just fill out insurance paperwork for people all the time and go through and have no connection to anything. Only thing, like, I would talk to people that I would work with, and they would just be like early adopters of whatever the new cell phone would be. And that was like the thing. Well, I'm an early adopter. And it's like, that's like the only tech thing there really is like, so in the professional space sometimes. And that would have been even further backed away than even being touched in via coding. I mean, I'm just basically salesperson / all these other things. But at the same time, I had to go back to something that was real. And now I'm like, I only do that. And I'm worried that I'll get burnt out on that. But thankfully, no, I like this stuff so much. I'm happy to actually be able to do it and talk about it.
That's really awesome, man. I think it's great when people find, what they really enjoy. And I think sometimes it takes a number of years. When I started, I was like an installer, right? Like cable installer. But I knew I wanted to be involved in technology, but just over time I kind of found.
So you used to do network installations. I was going to say I've talked about it, Jay, on this channel a lot. Jay, my good friend. So you were putting cable in wall, you were putting RJ45s in and rigging up an office or some sort of space.
Yeah, that's right. Like the quick story is I did that for a long time, but then I got involved in piracy because who doesn't? Except for my story. My story changed when the company busted me for doing it. But they ended up offering me a job. So I ended up, remember back in the day, you could like, maybe even in Estonia, this was popular. Like, free to air is probably popular over there. Over satellite, you can watch content without paying. And that's legit in a lot of countries. But the United States, there's the only one channel is free, and that's NASA. And so companies would leverage that technology that's used in Europe or other places where you can actually get content for free and sell these units in the United States, and then they would load custom firmware on there that would descramble the video for pay TV satellite companies, right? And there was like previous mods out there where you would modify the smart card that was actually on the original device. But the company was looking to hire someone that was knowledgeable in that space to help fight piracy, and that was me. So I got hired
because you had done that.
Yeah. So what's bringing it back to CRTs? So I built a lab, and so this was like 2006, and the lab was filled with CRTs because that's what was there for a time. So I started doing this job long enough where I was like, hey, could I work remotely? And they approved me. So I actually moved to Iowa, a small state in the United States, far away from where this company is, and I brought all those CRTs. So my basement looked like a broadcast center. But they weren't PVMs because the company couldn't afford that for a little lab. So they're all consumer grade. But I remember the day where the whole company was like, we're replacing everything with LCDs, including all the labs, including my house. And so I got rid of 12 13-inch CRTs, and I literally put them at the edge of the street. And some guy came over and was like, can I have these? And I'm like, sure. And I'm like, what are you going to do with them? And he's like, I'm going to make art out of them. And so that was kind of cool. Who knows what happens to the CRTs? But I'm regretting it right now because like I was talking to Steve at Retro World. I'm like, I really want a 13-inch CRT. It's the size I really want now.
That's the tough size because it's easy to hide away. It's 13 inches, like perfect for getting a couple. Keep them under the bed or something.
Yeah. That's the exact.
You're 100. I know we could probably have to wrap up soon. I know I got to go soon. But Steve, did I understand today you hit the centenary of CRTs?
Yeah. Is that what I put? A century. It's supposed to be century.
You said 100.
So
but isn't 100. That the word centenary? Isn't that the anniversary of 100?
Century.
I don't know where I got centenary from. Though.
All right, here's how I got Century Club, and it doesn't even. When I was in college, back in the early 2000s, I hung out with the swim team for some reason at this school I went to my freshman year. I just met them, and I started going to these parties. That outside of like a fraternity, the swim team were the biggest partiers at this school. And it was great because the swim team is co-ed, right? So you had there was like 100 of them. There's like 50 girls, 50 guys. So there's always a big crowd at parties. And the swim team, I can't even remember where I was going with this now, Lewis. I lost my
why are you talking about the swim team?
What are we talking
He's
about?
like,
you were Jalen.
Did anyone
swim
notice
girls.
he changed jackets for the last 30
Yeah,
minutes?
I did change.
Yeah, he did when you went away. Yeah, and
What were you at? Where were we going before that? I completely had a brain
your
fart.
centenary of CRTs.
Oh, Century,
and all
yes,
of a sudden you're talking about
Century
the
Club.
time.
The reason I got Century Club is because when I used to go back and party with the swimmers, there was this thing called Century Club, and you would have to sit there and we would watch a countdown on a clock, and you would have to drink 100 shots of beer, I think it was, and
What
every
swim meet was
minute,
this?
every
This
minute
was a
you
swimming club?
Yeah,
Well, you know,
and
Michael
so,
Phelps loved the bong, so it's
yes.
It's all the
See,
same,
this was
right?
the same thing. So it was. I want to say it was because you wouldn't chug a whole beer every minute. I don't think you'd die.
No,
100
it'd have to
beers.
be shots.
Yeah,
100
so-
to be 100
and
shots
and
of
it's and it was nuts because it was everybody would sit around and watch. Do you remember like you could go back and you'd watch a channel that would show you what was coming up on TV, and it would have some stupid ad in the corner, and it would have just a clock. And it would tell you what time it is. You'd sit there and say, "All right, it's this," because it would never go to commercial. So you just sit there and watch this channel because it had an automatic clock on it all the time. And you take 100 shots, and if you made it to the 100 shot point at 100 minutes, you made it into the Century Club. And then you had to then not throw up for 100 minutes after that, which a lot of people did not make. They made it to the Century Club and not past the
Did
throw up.
Steve make it to the Century
Oh,
Club?
yeah. That's what I'm saying. I remade
yeah.
it
Multiple
to the
times.
Century Club.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I was a pro at that kind of stupid
Yeah.
stuff.
Bicentenary
Yeah.
Century Club. Yeah.
So there was that. That's what, and yeah. So now I have 100 CRTs up in this house. That's nuts. I've got a lot of people. I'm going to start sending like, "Hey, you need to come get your stuff." Emails or do something.
Yeah.
It's like there's about 30 of them here. I'm like, yeah, you guys.
Yeah. Bob needs to back up a semi-trailer.
Yeah, Bob. Bob, come back up here. Bob, come drive south with a tractor trailer. I typed in Volvos and was looking at stuff, and it was just like, do I just go ahead and buy one of those big sleeper cabin tractor trailers just
you
to
need to make
cruise
a-
up and down the East Coast?
You could create a museum.
Yeah, well, that's another thing I was thinking about.
Charge
is having-
admission.
I wanted to buy. I thought it would be so. Actually, I did, Lewis, look at a property this week. Unfortunately, it's like 20 miles out of town, but there was this old store from the 1960s and 50s, and it's in the front of this house. Like, there's a house over here. It's on 7 acres of land, and then at the front of the property, there's this whole building that is like a store you'd walk into. But I mean, it is old, and I was like, man, it would be so awesome to just like have this filled. Of course, it's like 20. It would have it has a sign like that you could hang a RetroTech sign from, and I was like, this would be. I could start 1,000 CRTs in this place and just have trucks drive in and drive out, dropping them off.
You gotta,
So
you gotta
that's
tap
that's
into
too
that.
far away. I was like, there needs to be. I need to find. Hopefully, in the economic downturn, I can find a piece of prime real estate and then just fill it with like a retro museum. And then I thought in the center I could have. You know how you go to like a brewery and they always have like the brewmaster's quality control room there, and you see like the plexiglass. You could just see the brew. You could have my shop be in the middle there and just have open CRT parts everywhere. Kids come in touching tubes. We may get demonetized if we were monetized on this for that. Me saying kids coming in touching tubes.
Touching tubes.
I think you gotta
So-
tap into the Smash TV, and then those.
Yeah,
those-
that's the whole secret market right there. The Smash Kids. Hey, the best part about the Marriott thing is if you could imagine, there was one time where Shank would be coming. Hey, you got to meet this other guy. He's in the melee scene, and I'm just like, okay, cool. And oh, come on, man, come meet this next guy. And then one time he's like, there's this dude sitting there playing, and he's got a pink T-shirt on, and it says, "Show me your butthole." on his T-shirt, and it's like a cartoon drawing of a butt with a big star burst in the middle. And Shank's like, "Come here, look at this guy. What do you think of his shirt?" And that's how he introduced me. He's just sitting there playing Smash, and I was like, "So, did you get anybody to show their buttholes yet?" We just started laughing. Like, he's like, "Oh man, yeah, dude, it didn't work for a butthole, but some lady in the bar, she bought me a drink." And then I was like, "All right, cool, man." I was like, "This is like a Dazed and Confused moment here." And I was laughing because that was Saturday night, and then I saw him wandering around the convention Sunday, and he still had the same clothes on. And I was like, "Hey, man, it's Butthole Man." And he's like, "Oh, man, you're that dude. Yeah.
You're that CRT guy.
You're the dude. Yeah." So it was funny. They were referring to me as like the old man boomer of their like group. Like, "Oh, this old man." And then they'd be joking. I'm like, "I got to go to bed, at a decent hour. I got to go to get the blue
Justin,
special,
did you
blue
see
plate
these
special."
Melee kids at the event?
Yeah, and not only that, the story's good when this is the 17th time that I've heard Steve say it, especially when we were eating dinner. We're about 2.5 hours in, and he had enough drinks in him. He started restarting. He was like, "Dude, I got to tell you this story about Shank and the Melee twins or whatever."
You know my pain, Justin. You know my pain.
like,
oh, God.
You got to pretend like
Get
it's the first
fired
time you
up.
heard it, though.
He loves it.
Yeah.
He loves it.
Since we're here at 2 hours, the only people listening to us at this point is ourselves anyway.
It's all right. That doesn't matter. Create it for yourself. It doesn't matter.
Right.
Create things for yourself. It's beautiful.
Just kidding.
But yeah, maybe we should wrap it up. I got to get some food and get on with stuff.
Yeah.
Justin, thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate it. I know we sort of didn't have a big plan, but it was nice just to chat with you about things and just to hear something about how you do it. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. It was awesome.
Yeah, thanks. And definitely go say hello to Justin on his next stream. Go check out his channel at Console Kit
Yes.
on YouTube. And then you also have a website you have associated with that? Is that what you said?
Yeah, so my website, consolekits.com, is basically a way to find arcade one-ups at a low discount price. So I track. So some people, they don't like the idea of a $500-$600, but because these are mass quantity at retail, they're actually seasonal products. The companies like Walmart will liquidate the old stock right before they buy new, and they've been doing this for years. So people can pick up cabinets at like $200, $300, brand new, if they just wait. And so I try to help people out with that. And there's always deals. And so my website, I just put it together. It literally, behind the scenes, is going to all the retail websites and tracking the price, and then it automatically updates when the price is